The vast spirit sea surged across the sky like a world-destroying flood, crushing any obstacles in its path into dust, its power shaking the heavens and earth. The spirit sea roiled, waves towering high, its emerald green light spreading throughout the world. Before the spirit sea, the flame dragon roared. The Vajra palm aimed to shatter the heavens, and the towering willow tree gleamed with astonishing blue light. 3 formidable attacks combined in an overwhelming display, sending tremors through the heart. However, despite such a powerful onslaught, the spirit sea swept forward without hesitation, ultimately enveloping and drowning the flame dragon, the Vajra palm, and the giant willow tree in its massive waves. Sizzling. As soon as the flame dragon was engulfed by the spirit sea, thick white mist exploded around it. The sizzling sound grew louder as the flame dragon howled and struggled fiercely, but its enormous body quickly withered at an astonishing speed. The Vajra palm also rushed into the spirit sea, only to dim rapidly. The willow tree similarly withered swiftly, as if it were being eroded. The spirit sea wrapped around the 3 powerful attacks, and as spiritual energy howled, it seemed to emit a silent roar. The giant waves surged, and the 3 overwhelming attacks shattered at that very moment, transforming into light spots that were absorbed by the spirit sea. As the 3 attacks were erased by the spirit sea, Emoshio and his companions' faces changed drastically. They couldn't hold back a mouthful of blood, which splattered across their chests. Outside the spirit sea, the onlookers all inhaled sharply. Though they had felt the terrifying power of Mu Chen's assault, no one had expected that the combined full-strength attacks of Emoshio and his companions would be directly suppressed in a single clash. Mu Chen floated in midair, calmly watching Emoshio and his companions. With a flick of his finger, the spirit sea surged again, sweeping toward them with a thunderous roar, as if it would engulf everything. Whoosh! Seeing this, Emoshio and his companions changed their expressions. After witnessing the terrifying power within the spirit sea, they dared not let even a trace of it touch them. They immediately stomped their feet, and their figures shot out in 3 different directions. Boom! The spirit sea slammed into a mountain peak, and the towering mountain crumbled instantly, reduced to flat ground. Boom! As the mountain collapsed, Mu Chen's seal technique shifted again. The spirit sea suddenly split into 3 currents, moving as fast as lightning across the sky, before surrounding Emoshio and his companions at an incredible speed. The sea currents swirled around them, and the oppressive force they felt sealed off all their escape routes. The faces of Emoshio and his companions turned pale at last. They dared not move a muscle, knowing that if they did, the vast spirit sea would crush them like the mountain that had just been flattened. Fortunately, the spirit sea currents only surrounded them and didn't crush them again. Not far away, Mu Chen, with his black eyes fixed on the 3, said nothing. However, his indifferent expression sent chills down their spines. The 3 exchanged glances, and finally, with a bitter smile, they raised their hands and said, "We admit defeat." At this point, there was no room for refusal. They knew that Mu Chen would never show mercy. They didn't doubt that if they resisted any longer, he would ruthlessly strike without hesitation. As soon as their words of surrender echoed, the world fell silent for a moment. Then, waves of excited gasps burst out, filling the air. The faces of everyone around shifted dramatically, as the result was completely unexpected. In the distance, Xiao Huang and the others, who had been watching with smirks, suddenly found their expressions stiffening. Xiao Huang's lips twitched, his eyes filled with darkness as he stared at Mu Chen. The techniques Mu Chen had displayed earlier made even him feel a pang of fear. How is this possible? Xiao King croaked, his voice raspy. They were all stunned behind him. Mou and the others were trembling, their faces filled with shock. They never expected that in just half a month, Mu Chen's strength had already reached this level. Indeed, he has some tricks up his sleeve. Wu Ling fixed his gaze on the sky, a hint of surprise and seriousness crossing his face. He nodded slowly. Mu Chen truly lived up to his reputation. Even though he had missed some training time due to the spirit road in the past, with his talent, It was clear that making up for that lost time wasn't too difficult. This guy, beside Wu Ling. Wu Yingying's beautiful eyes sparkled with a hint of admiration. Mu Qin's aura was so impressive that even she, who was usually so critical, couldn't bring herself to utter a word of condemnation. Luoli, whose body had been tense, relaxed slightly at that moment. She smiled as she looked at Mu Qin's back. This young man was gradually revealing the same brilliance he had shown in the Spirit Road. The future would only make him more radiant and dazzling. When Qing Xian puckered her rosy lips slightly, her proud eyes still shining, but there was also a touch of surprise in her heart. She found that this young man seemed like an endless abyss, impossible to fully gauge. However, even someone as proud as her had to admit in her heart that Mu Chen was indeed exceptional. In the sky, Mu Chen paid no attention to the thoughts of those around him. He simply stared at Emotio and the others. The three of them wore gloomy expressions, clearly feeling the weight of today's confrontation. After all, they had all come this far because of their tremendous talent, and they had been fortunate too. They had believed that in this Spiritual Academy Grand Competition, they were among the top-tier competitors. Except for figures like Ji Xian, Wen Qingxian, and Wu Ling, who were practically monstrous talents, they thought they could easily dominate. But now, reality had given them a cruel answer. The three of them had joined forces, but were decisively defeated by Mu Chen. What was even more critical was that Mu Chen's strength seemed to be nothing more than spiritual energy tribulation. The three of them exchanged glances, then sighed in unison. They finally understood why even someone like Ji Xian would treat Mu Chen with such caution and even send them to test him. They each took an academy token in hand, a gesture of defeat. They flicked their fingers, sending the tokens flying towards Mu Chen. As the losers, they were fully aware of the rules. Even though they were reluctant, those points had been hard-earned through great effort. Mu Chen grasped the tokens in his hand, glancing at them. His eyebrows raised slightly when he saw that each token represented 10,000 points. Quite a high score. Are you Ji Xian's subordinates? Mu Chen casually asked, playing with the tokens. We're not interested in being anyone's subordinates, Emotio replied. We just owed him a favor. Now, helping him test you, the favor is repaid. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. He pondered for a moment, then flicked his finger, sending the three tokens back to them. You. Emotio and the others stared at him in surprise. This is between Ji Xian and me. Stay out of it next time. If there's a next time, it might not be as easy, Mu Chen said coolly. He didn't have any direct grievances with Emotio and the others, and he didn't want things to get too hostile. These people had some ability, and making too many enemies was not his goal. Emotio and the others froze, then their faces alternated between green and red. After a long pause, they took the tokens, looking somewhat embarrassed. Thank you, Captain Mu Chen, for your generosity. These points represented the total for their entire team. If they gave them all away here, it would be hard to face their teammates. Although their pride made them reluctant, reason eventually won out over face. Mu Chen flicked his sleeve, and the spiritual sea surrounding the three of them quickly dissipated, turning into countless light dots that drifted down toward the barren mountain range below. The others in this world, upon seeing Mu Chen drive away Emotio and his companions, and also make them too afraid to harbor even the slightest resentment, couldn't help but feel a bit of admiration. After all, not everyone could ignore the huge temptation brought by tens of thousands of points. Such a vast amount of points was enough to push any team into the top 16 rankings. Mu Chen drove away Emotio and the others, then turned again. His indifferent gaze locked onto Xiao Huang and his group, and he said faintly, "After watching the show for so long, have you gathered enough for the 20,000 points?" Xiao Huang's expression froze for a moment, then he gritted his teeth and said, "Mu Chen, don't push your luck? It seems you don't want to hand them over voluntarily," Mu Chen replied. "Mu Chen, why go this far? At most, we will no longer interfere in your matters with Ji Xian. All grudges will be wiped clean. How about it?" Xiao Huang said in a low voice. Judging by how Mu Chen chose to settle things peacefully with Emotio and the others earlier, it seemed he wasn't keen on making too many enemies, especially since he already had a primary nemesis. Making more enemies would clearly be something Mu Chen wanted to avoid. Therefore, This gave Xiao Huang and his group a chance. Mu Chen looked up, his gaze meeting Xiao Huang's, and a mocking smile slowly formed on his lips. His voice, gradually turning colder, carried a chilling, killing intent that began to spread through the sky. If you refuse to give up the points, then each of you can keep just one hand. When Mu Chen's somewhat cold voice echoed through the sky, it felt as though the temperature had dropped. Many teams trembled inwardly, their gazes turning toward Mu Chen, but all they saw was his handsome face devoid of any emotion. Clearly, Mu Chen wasn't joking. "What did you say?" Xiao Huang's lips twitched, and he barked, not expecting that Mu Chen not only had no intention of letting this go, but was even demanding that they each leave behind a hand. "If you want us to keep a hand, you probably don't have the qualifications." Xiao Huang's voice was cold, and killing intent surged in his eyes. Mu Chen gave them a faint glance, and without saying much more, the killing aura emanating from him grew more intense. The reason he had let Emotio and the others go easily earlier was that there was no direct conflict or personal animosity. But now, members of the Alliance of Academies had been opposing him from the start, and Xiao Huang had shown no mercy to him during the spiritual array earlier. Moreover, Mu Chen had never believed that excessive compassion would be a good thing. Compassion couldn't bring respect. While letting Emotio and the others go might have saved him some trouble, it also sent the message that offending Mu Chen wasn't something to fear. Once others started thinking that way, Mu Chen's life wouldn't be peaceful. Thus, after showing mercy, there must also be thunderous methods. Clearly, what was given to Emotio and the others earlier was meant for Xiao Huang and his group now. Mu Chen turned his gaze toward Luo Li and Wen Qingxian, then gave both women a slight nod. Buzz. Luo Li clenched her jade-like hand, and the Luo god's sword burst forth with sharp sword light. The indescribable edge of the sword energy spread out, causing the surrounding space to subtly warp. Luo Li's clear eyes calmly gazed at Xiao Huang and the others, the tip of her sword slowly rising and locking onto them. At the same time, Wen Qingxian smiled gracefully, though her smile was icy. Gripping her golden war spear, her hair cascaded down like a waterfall, and her narrow phoenix eyes held a cold indifference. Brilliant golden light, carrying immense spiritual power, erupted from her body in a surge. Both women were targeting Xiao Huang and his group. The sudden pressure they released made even the strongest experts in the area feel their hearts tighten, sensing an indescribable danger. "Leave." Xiao Huang and Xiao Wang's eyes flickered urgently, and in the next instant, both of them almost simultaneously shouted and transformed into streaks of light, racing toward the horizon like bolts of lightning. Whoosh! However, just as their bodies moved, Luo Li's delicate form vanished from her original position. When she reappeared, she was like a ghost, standing directly in front of Xiao Huang. Her stunning face remained as calm as a still pond, and she slashed the Luo god's sword downward. Swoosh! The expression on Xiao Huang's face changed drastically as the massive bow in his hand, blazing with flames, suddenly drew back. A fiery arrow shot out with a violent surge. Boom! The sword light slashed down, instantly splitting the flaming arrow in half. The sword light then ruthlessly struck Xiao Huang's chest. Sizzle! Xiao Huang's clothes were torn apart in an instant, revealing a gleaming inner armor beneath. It was clearly a defensive spirit artifact. The inner armor emitted a powerful aura, enveloping Xiao Huang in its protective shield. Crack! However, this protection was short-lived. Faced with Luo Li's merciless sword strike, the shield formed by the inner armor only held for a moment before being pierced through. Blood splattered from Xiao Huang's chest as his body was struck with immense force, flying backwards and crashing into a mountain. His body was embedded in the mountain wall, looking utterly battered. Luo Li stood in the air, holding the Luo god sword. Her long hair fluttered in the breeze, and her dress accentuated her slender, graceful figure. The breathtaking scene left everyone in awe. Boom! In the distance, golden light spread, accompanied by the clear cry of a phoenix. Then, a figure was sent flying back in a disarrayed retreat. Along the way, towering trees were shattered by the shockwave. That figure staggered back for over 100 meters before finally regaining balance. Everyone looked, and it was none other than Xiao Huang. But now his face was pale, with a streak of blood at the corner of his mouth. He no longer had the commanding presence he had before. In front of him, golden light streaked past, and when Qingxian appeared, holding a golden spear in her jade-like hands, she pointed it at an angle, her phoenix eyes filled with coldness. Although Xiao Huang had set up a powerful spirit array, once the array was gone, his combat power was even weaker than Xiao Huang's. How could he possibly stand up to Wen Qingxian? At this moment, murmurs of astonishment spread across the heavens and earth. Those who gazed at Luoli and Wen Qingxian couldn't help but express their admiration. The strength they had demonstrated earlier was truly astonishing. Of course, no one was surprised by Wen Qingxuan's strength. After all, she had once held the top spot on the rankings and now stood third. But as for Luoli, she was a mystery. Though her appearance and temperament rivaled Wen Qingxuan's, her personality was entirely different. Wen Qingxian was proud and domineering, like a phoenix soaring through the sky. In contrast, Luoli seemed serene, like a lotus blooming in a quiet valley. So when they saw this quiet girl who had been following Mu Chun now display such incredible power, they were all taken aback. Mou and the other members of the Alliance of Academies turned pale as they watched Xiao Huang and Xiao Wang in such a defeated state. At this point, they had no will to escape. Their eyes were filled with helpless defeat. The Mu Chun before them was clearly no longer someone they could contend with. His rate of growth had far exceeded their expectations. Mu Chun cast a cold glance at them, then shifted his gaze to Xiao Huang, smiling faintly as he said, "Your choice hasn't changed, has it?" Before Xiao Huang could respond, Mu Chun raised his hand, signaling a slash toward Luoli and Wen Qingxian. Luoli and Wen Qingxian nodded in acknowledgement, cold light flickering in their eyes, preparing to act again. Wait. Xiao Huang's expression changed drastically as he hurriedly shouted. From Mu Chin's indifferent demeanor and the cold glares from the two women, he knew that if he hesitated any longer, he might lose an arm today. "I'll give the score." Xiao Huang gritted his teeth, then lifted his gaze toward Mou and the others. Seeing his cold, determined look, the others hesitated but, upon meeting Xiao Huang's harsh gaze, sighed bitterly and threw their academy tokens toward him. In truth, they weren't from the same academy as Xiao Huang. They had joined the Alliance of Academies because they valued his strength and hoped to gain some benefits. But looking at the current situation, they had gained little and were about to lose everything. This made Mou and the others feel dejected, their disappointment in Xiao Huang growing. They exchanged glances. It seemed the Alliance of Academies wasn't worth staying in any longer. Xiao Huang didn't know what was going through their minds. Mu Chun flicked his fingers, sending all the academy tokens towards Wen Qingxian. The latter paused for a moment upon seeing this. "I did promise you a first place. With these 20,000 points, although it still won't be enough to reclaim the top spot, it'll bring you much closer," Mu Chun smiled and said to Wen Qingxian. At this point, Wen Qingxian already had around 20,000 points, but Ji Xian, in first place, had accumulated 50,000. Clearly, while Wen Qingxian had been trapped, Ji Xian had used the time to extend his lead. Wen Qingxian took the academy tokens in her delicate hands. After a brief hesitation, she nodded. The light in her hands flickered as she transferred the 20,000 points. As Wen Qingxian transferred the points, their team's score surged to about 40,000, overtaking Wu Ling, who had originally been in second place. Wu Ling, standing on a nearby mountain peak, looked at his academy token with a helpless shrug. He wasn't in a hurry, knowing that in the final moments, the rankings would change drastically. Xiao Huang and his group sure missed their mark this time, Wu Ling smiled faintly. "They're clearly cheating," Wu Yingying said angrily, referring to how Wen Qingxian had surpassed them. "It's all hard-earned points." "There's no such thing as cheating," Wu Ling said, nonchalantly waving it off, though his eyes lingered with interest on the tall, slender figure of Mu Qian in the distance. He knew that after this battle, Mu Qian and Ji Xian would be locked in direct opposition. In the sky above, after transferring the points, Wen Qingxian casually threw the academy tokens towards Xiao Huang. He caught them, looking at the half-diminished tokens, a pang of pain crossing his face. Xiao Huang's team had originally been ranked 9th, but with the loss of half their points, they immediately dropped out of the top 16. Let's go. Xiao Huang shot Mu Chen a furious glare, but didn't dare show it. He waved his hand and quickly led Xiao King, who had just freed himself from the mountain, away. Their figures looked somewhat disheveled. Mou and the others hesitated for a moment before following, but kept a considerable distance from Xiao Huang's group. Mu Chen didn't stop them from leaving this time. Instead, he raised his head, looking into the distance. His handsome face was calm, though his black eyes held a sharp, cold glint. Xun'er, if you want to play, then this time, I'll play along to the very end. Boom. In a deep valley, a waterfall like a dragon descended from a giant peak, shaking the entire valley with its deafening roar. The waterfall struck with terrifying force. When it reached a certain point, it was suddenly lifted, splitting into massive streams, which surged downward, crushing any large rocks that stood in its path. At the place where the waterfall rose, faint spiritual energy light could be seen. Upon closer inspection, a figure could be discerned, sitting cross-legged in the waterfall. The figure sat motionless, letting the force of the water crash against him, but he didn't budge. He remained in this meditative state for about an hour before slowly opening his eyes. His gaze blazed with radiant light as an immense surge of spiritual energy swept out. The waterfall before him was immediately scattered. After a while, it resumed its descent. The figure stood up, walking out of the waterfall. His body was enveloped in spiritual light, his skin shimmering with a jade-like glow. The immense weight of the water didn't hinder him in the slightest as he stepped out, leaving no trace of water on his body. He then floated outside the waterfall. His figure moved, landing on a rock beside the waterfall. The person wore white robes, his black hair flowing loosely. His face was so handsome it could rival the sun, with a gentle smile on his lips that made him seem cultured and elegant. On his chest was the Academy emblem, featuring the rising sun and the holy light spreading across it. This was the symbol of the Celestial Spirit Academy, and he was Xun'er. Whoosh! A slight wind-breaking sound was heard from the side, and immediately, a figure appeared before Xun'er. This was also a handsome young man. He smiled at Xun'er and said, Xiao Huang's team dropped out of the top 16, while Wen Xuan's team rose from 3rd place to 2nd. It seems they failed, Xun'er said with a smile, his expression showing no surprise. Mu Feng, has Mu Chen appeared? The young man, Mu Feng, nodded, his expression showing some surprise. According to the news, Mu Chen showed up. Emocio and his team teamed up, but he defeated them with one move. TSK, this guy is quite strong, being able to do such a thing. One move defeat? Xun'er said casually. If it's him, it's not surprising. But I didn't expect him to catch up so quickly. I originally thought the delay during the Spirit Road year would slow down his cultivation speed. By the way, why hasn't Emocio's team dropped in points? Xun'er suddenly asked, noticing that Emocio's team was still at the bottom of the top 16. Mu Chen didn't make a move against them. Instead, he let them go. But later, when he faced Xiao Huang's team, he was ruthless. He directly announced that no points would be given and only one hand would be spared, Mu Feng explained. One hand shows mercy, the other strikes like thunder. Xun'er narrowed his eyes. As expected of Mu Chen, his tactics are still sharp. I originally wanted him to make more enemies, but he didn't fall for it. Mu Feng suddenly understood. No wonder you knew Emocio's team would most likely fail, but still let them go. You were setting a trap for Mu Chen. But unfortunately, that kid isn't so easy to deal with. If he were simple, I wouldn't need to worry so much, Xun'er smiled faintly. Emocio and his team don't have much of a relationship with us. They were only part of a plan to owe us a favor. Now that this matter is over, and with the favor Mu Chen gave them, they won't be able to approach us again. They're just small players. Do they really think they can hold on to a spot in the bottom of the top 16 by their own strength? Behind them, there are many teams with comparable or even greater strength. Without our protection, they won't last long in that position, Mu Feng chuckled. So what's your next move? Mu Chen and the others seem to have teamed up with Wen Xun'er. This girl is no simple character. Their alliance might cause us some trouble, Mu Feng furrowed his brows. Ji Xian nodded slightly. When Qing Xian was indeed not an ordinary person, and even he had to admit that. Don't rush. There's no need to lose composure because of them. Ji Xian's eyes flickered with light, and he smiled faintly. Back when we were on the Spirit Road, I had Mu Chen expelled. This time, I'll let him truly understand who the real winner is. Mu Feng nodded. Having followed Ji Xian all the way here, he knew just how terrifying the man before him was. Though he hadn't seen Mu Chen, he didn't believe anyone in this spiritual academy grand competition could truly defeat Ji Xian. By the way, Ji Xian's voice paused slightly as he looked at Mu Feng, his eyes filled with an odd light. After a long while, he said, "There's a girl by Mu Chen's side named Luoli, right?" Mu Feng nodded, giving Ji Xian a glance, as he could sense the rare oddness in the latter's words. That Luoli has always been by Mu Chen's side. She's very strong. So much so that one could say she's deeply concealed. I believe she's probably no weaker than when Qing Xian, Mu Feng said. She's the next heir of the Luo god clan. How could she be ordinary? Ji Xian murmured. However, as he thought of Luo Li always being by Mu Chen's side, even with his deep schemes, a dark expression appeared on his face. He felt a sense of discomfort in his heart. That emotion was likely jealousy. Ji Xian would ultimately become an irreconcilable enemy to Mu Chen on the Spirit Road. He knew that one of the reasons was likely because of the girl who, no matter what, always quietly stood behind Mu Chen. No matter what he did, he couldn't earn the girl's gentle gaze, and no matter what he did, her faint smile would never be for him. He felt an intense bitterness. Since childhood, he had been a prodigy, shining brightly like the sun with his excellence. But this was the first time he had experienced such a feeling of defeat, where others' admiration for him meant nothing. Since he couldn't make her care, he decided to make sure she remembered him, whether it was with hatred or murderous intent. So, on the Spirit Road, he designed a plan to frame Luo Li, forcing the usually calm Mu Chen into a fury. This led to a bloody calamity that resulted in his expulsion. On the day Mu Chen was expelled from the Spirit Road, Ji Xian watched from a distance. He saw the young man cast a calm glance as he left, and that very calmness made Ji Xian's eyes darken. At that time, Luo Li was also present. She quietly watched Mu Chen leave, never once looking in Ji Xian's direction. When Mu Chen disappeared from view, she turned and left, leaving behind a slender silhouette in Ji Xian's eyes. That day, Ji Xian's emotions were unusually enraged. Though he had achieved his goal and forced Mu Chen out of the Spirit Road, many would see it as a perfect success. After all, in that place, methods weren't what mattered. Only the outcome was important. However, Ji Xian wasn't pleased. The calm gaze of Mu Chen as he left and the image of Luo Li turning away gave him no satisfaction. Moreover, after Mu Chen was expelled, Ji Xian never saw Luo Li again, until they reached the end of the Spirit Road. She was still wearing a black dress, her silver hair falling down her slender waist. She stood alone, and her eyes, like transparent glass, finally swept a gentle glance at Ji Xian. Just that one glance made Ji Xian's back instinctively straighten, showcasing his brilliance. But the girl ignored it. In front of all the talented elites, she slowly raised her sword, its tip pointing straight at Ji Xian. She didn't say a word. As her silver hair fluttered, she launched her attack. Fierce, relentless. They ended up injuring each other. The girl said nothing. She gave up the chance to compete for the Spirit Crown, instead dragging Ji Xian down with her, denying him that glory. In her own way, she showed Ji Xian and everyone her pin-up anger. At that moment, Ji Xian stepped back, a little disheveled. But when he saw the girl, also covered in wounds, a surge of murderous intent filled his heart. Not aimed at Luo Li, but at Mu Chen. That guy was simply lucky to have met Luo Li first. Originally, this girl should have been the one to do anything for him, not someone like Mu Chen. Without him, Ji Xian would have been the true winner of the Spirit Road. Whether it was glory or the girl, it should have been his. Creak. Ji Xian slowly clenched his fists, veins bulging beneath his jade-like skin. The sound of waterfalls roared with the damp air, pulling him out of his thoughts. Yet his eyes grew even colder, sending a tremor through Mu Feng beside him. Ji Xian raised his head, staring coldly into the distance. Luoli, this time, I will trample Mu Chen underfoot in front of you. I will make you see that compared to me, Mu Chen is nothing. Whether it's in skill or strength, I will be better than Mu Chen. So, only I am truly suited for you. Amidst the wreckage of the mountains, the once lively atmosphere was gone. With the battle's end, the powerful teams that had gathered here quietly dispersed. Mu Chen stood on the mountain peak, looking at the now empty sky. Then he turned and looked back at the group of young women behind him. The 3 teams from the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy were gathered there. TSK, I really didn't expect this. Just a month or 2, and you've become so strong. It's truly impressive, said a girl with a seductive and fiery figure, walking over with a smile. It was Tang Meier, who Mu Chen and the others had met not long after the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition began. At this moment, she was gazing intently at Mu Chen, her eyes sparkling with bright light. When they first met, Mu Chen was just at the later stage of the heavenly realm, but now, he had already passed the spiritual energy tribulation. What was even more terrifying was that his true combat power was enough to rival even experts who had overcome the first-level divine soul tribulation. Such progress was truly astonishing. What's wrong? Mayor, have you two met before? When Qing Xian, who was standing nearby, asked in surprise. From her expression, it seemed that Tang Meier hadn't mentioned her previous encounters with Mu Chen and the others. She then looked at Mu Chen with some suspicion and asked, "He didn't bully you, did he?" Mu Chen's face darkened, and he shot a fierce glare at Wen Qing Xian. However, the girl before him paid no attention to his threat. Instead, she arrogantly tilted her sharp, snow-white chin, resembling a queen. Hee, with Luoli's sister around, even if he wanted to bully you, he wouldn't have the courage, Tang Meier said, covering her red lips with her jade hand, laughing in a delicate voice. Luoli, standing to the side, gave a faint smile and cast a brief glance at Mu Chen with her clear, bright eyes. 3 women, 1 scene. Mu Chen suddenly felt a headache. Even dealing with breaking arrays or handling emotio, and his team seemed easier than dealing with these 3 women. Seeing Mu Chen's slightly annoyed expression, the 3 girls couldn't help but laugh lightly. Hey, not bad. You've got quite the taste. Could it be that you're interested in the most proud and beautiful phoenix of our 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy? Tang Meier whispered as she leaned closer to Mu Chen, chuckling softly. But this might be a bit difficult. Qing Xian is too high-spirited. I fear you won't be able to tame her. Mu Chen felt a little embarrassed by Tang Meier's bold and straightforward words. He glanced at Wen Qing Xian, who was talking with Luoli, and gave a dry laugh, saying, Sister Meier, please don't joke. I don't have that intention. Mu Chen was very clear. Wen Qing Xian wasn't interested in him, but rather in Luoli. So, in a sense, he had to be more cautious around her. Poor little Xun'er, always thinking about someone in the 10,000 Phoenixes Spiritual Academy. While that someone is surrounded by flowers, enjoying himself, Tang Meier said, glancing at Mu Chen with her beautiful eyes. Mu Chen felt as though her gaze was accusing him of being a heartless scoundrel. He could only smile bitterly. There was no way to explain this situation. What are your plans next? Fortunately, at this moment, when Qing Xian and Luoli approached, the former looked at Mu Chen with her bright eyes, her delicate face becoming serious. Mu Chen thought for a moment. The Spiritual Academy Grand Competition was now entering its final stage, and this was when the most intense battles would take place. With so many teams, only 8 would advance to the final tournament. Thus, to secure one of those 8 spots, any team with some strength would surely fight tooth and nail. Previously, Ji Xian sent Emotio and the others to test you. That could be seen as a declaration of war. Do you want to confront him directly? When Qing Xian said with a slight frown. But I must warn you, Ji Xian is extremely scheming. Among the top 16 teams, many are his allies. Oh. Mu Chen raised an eyebrow. The teams that came after you, Emotio and his 3 teams, weren't really Ji Xian's allies. They only owe him a favor, and from what I know about Ji Xian, it's likely that he set this up intentionally, when Qing Xian said thoughtfully. Mu Chen nodded. With Ji Xian's cunning, It wouldn't be difficult for him to arrange such a thing, and it certainly fit his character. Emoshio and the others were just pawns he used to test Mu Chen. Then who are Ji Xian's allies now? Mu Chen asked. Ranked 10th is LV from the Celestial Spirit Academy. It's a top-tier spiritual academy, and more importantly, LV and his team have gained some significant opportunities on the Relic Continent. When Qingxian glanced at Mu Chen and asked, "Do you know the Bone Sovereign Sect?" The Bone Sovereign Sect must have been a top-tier force on the ancient Relic Continent in ancient times, with strength and foundation that aren't much weaker than that of the Divine Wood Temple. Luo Li smiled and said. Mu Chen shrugged helplessly. When Qingxian and Luo Li were not of ordinary backgrounds, so naturally, they knew far more than he did. Still, Luo Li is well-traveled and knowledgeable. When Qingxian smiled at Luo Li before continuing, the team from the Heavenly Spirit Academy led by LV is the one that obtained the inheritance of the Bone Sovereign Sect. There's also the 8th-ranked Wang Jiang from the 10,000 Beasts Academy. Similarly, they acquired the inheritance of the Demonic Crocodile Hall. In ancient times, Demonic Crocodile Hall was also a powerful force on the ancient Relic Continent, so their current strength is no slouch either. Mu Chen nodded slowly. It seemed that those with good fortune were not just limited to them. Are they all allies of Ji Xian? Mu Chen narrowed his eyes. It seemed Ji Xian had indeed put a lot of thought into his alliances, as none of the people he gathered were simple characters. When Qingxian nodded lightly, LV and Wang Jiang are both quite famous in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition now. But Ji Xian has an even more heavyweight ally. Mu Chen's gaze sharpened. The teams of LV and Wang Jiang had already reached the 10th and 8th ranks, yet there was someone even more significant? Lu Qingyun, from the Azure Sky Spirit Academy. He's also a genius from the Wind Spirit Clan. It's said that he was specifically lent to the Azure Sky Spirit Academy from the Wind Spirit Clan for this competition, when Xuan's expression turned a little more serious. Lu Qingyun. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed slightly, his heart shaken. He hadn't expected that Ji Xian would also recruit Lu Qingyun, who was from one of the 5 great academies. He had heard some rumors about Lu Qingyun. This was definitely someone who could vie for a spot in the top 8. With Ji Xian added to the mix, this lineup would be just as strong as the alliance between them and Wen Qingxian. Although they usually fight separately, when they encounter difficult situations, they will join forces. Based on my guess, they will eventually target you. When Qingxian spoke softly, aware of the grudges between Mu Chen and Ji Xian. Ji Xian really is clever, Mu Chen said calmly. Years apart, and Ji Xian's tactics of forming alliances had become even more refined. That's why I don't plan for you to go and trouble Ji Xian right now. Doing so wouldn't give you many advantages, when Qingxian advised. Mu Chen nodded slightly. He wasn't arrogant and knew how tricky Ji Xian was. Even if he was strong, it wouldn't be easy to deal with such an alliance by relying on just themselves. So, what are you planning to do now? After explaining the situation, when Qingxian asked again, Mu Chen smiled, then took out his academy token. Staring at the glowing name on it, he lightly tapped it with his long fingers. I don't have any specific plans, but since Ji Xian has gone to such lengths to form an alliance to encircle me, we certainly can't just sit back and wait. Such as, for example, while his subordinates are still trying to earn points and secure their rankings. A cold light flickered in Mu Chen's black eyes as his hand slowly clenched into a fist. We'll start by removing all of his subordinates. When Qingxian raised an elegant eyebrow, her bright phoenix-like eyes watching Mu Chen with interest. The young man's originally handsome face became much more profound at this moment, making him appear like a lion poised to pounce on its prey. Interested in earning some points? Mu Chen smiled at Wen Qingxian. When Qingxian pouted slightly, if you want free help, just say so. No need for all this pretense. Everyone gets something they need, Mu Chen chuckled. When Qingxian didn't argue with him. After a brief pause, she nodded. I owe you a favor from before. This time, helping you will count as repaying it. Besides, I don't like Ji Xian either. Causing him some trouble won't hurt me. Mu Chen smiled, then slowly stretched out, a lazy gesture before he straightened up. Since Ji Xian had already started making a move on him, he no longer needed to hold back. Ji Xian, our confrontation begins now. the subordinates you painstakingly gathered. I'll make sure to remove them one by one.